The night was supposed to be a celebration of love and commitment. Our anniversary party was in full swing, with laughter echoing through the garden, glasses clinking, and warm lights casting a romantic glow. My husband, Anthony, had planned the entire evening down to the last detail. It was perfect, or so I thought. The garden was decorated with twinkling fairy lights and elegant floral arrangements. Tables were adorned with white linens and candles, casting a warm glow as the sun set. Guests mingled, sharing stories and toasting to our years together. I watched Anthony move through the crowd, greeting friends and family with his characteristic charm. He looked handsome in his tailored suit, his smile genuine as he laughed with our guests. As the evening wore on, Anthony's best friend, Paul, joined us at our table. Paul was always the life of the party, his boisterous laugh and endless stories making him the center of attention. He was a large man, with a presence that filled any room he entered. Tonight, however, he had indulged in a bit too much wine, his face flushed and his speech slightly slurred. We were reminiscing about old times, sharing memories of our college days, when Paul leaned in, a mischievous grin on his face. "Hey, Nancy," he began, his voice loud enough to draw the attention of those nearby. "Remember when we had that wild night on your wedding day? Man, that was something. I never thought you'd get knocked up. I'm not gonna lie, I'd like to do that again." The music seemed to stop, and a hush fell over the table. The laughter and chatter around us faded into the background as Paul's words hung in the air. Anthony's face went pale, his eyes wide with shock and betrayal. I froze, unable to process the gravity of Paul's words. My secret was out. Anthony's expression shifted from shock to a hard, cold anger. His jaw clenched, and I could see the muscles in his neck tense as he processed what he had just heard. Without a word, he stood up abruptly, his chair clattering to the ground. The sudden movement drew the attention of our guests, who turned to see what had happened. "Anthony, wait," I started, but he cut me off with a sharp look. His eyes, usually so warm and loving, were now filled with an icy fury. Anthony didn't say a word. He turned and stormed out of the party, his footsteps echoing on the stone path as he made his way to the gate. The crowd parted, whispers spreading like wildfire as he disappeared into the night. I stood there, my mind racing. The party continued around me, but it felt as if I was in a bubble, the sounds muffled and distant. Paul, realizing the enormity of his mistake, looked at me with wide, apologetic eyes. "Nancy, I didn't mean to." "Shut up, Paul," I snapped, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "Just shut up." The guests, sensing the tension, began to murmur amongst themselves. Some discreetly made their way to the exit, while others lingered, curious about the unfolding drama. I felt their eyes on me, their judgment heavy in the air. I knew I had to do something, but I felt paralyzed. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but one thing was clear. I had to find Anthony. I needed to explain, to somehow make things right. I excused myself from the table, ignoring Paul's attempts to apologize, and made my way through the garden, my heart pounding in my chest. Outside, the night air was cool and crisp. I looked around, hoping to catch a glimpse of Anthony, but he was nowhere to be seen. I pulled out my phone and dialed his number, but it went straight to voicemail. "Anthony, please call me. We need to talk," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." I paced the driveway, my mind racing. How had everything gone so wrong so quickly? One moment we were celebrating our anniversary, and the next, our world was crashing down around us. I thought about the implications of Paul's revelation. How could I have been so careless, so reckless? Minutes turned into hours as I waited for Anthony to return. Guests continued to trickle out of the party, offering sympathetic glances as they left. Paul approached me once more, his expression contrite. "Nancy, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen." "Just go home, Paul," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "You've done enough." He hesitated, then nodded, turning to leave. I watched him go, a mix of anger and sadness churning inside me. The night had turned cold, and I wrapped my arms around myself, shivering. I didn't know what to do, where to go. All I could think about was finding Anthony and trying to salvage what was left of our marriage. As the last of the guests departed, I walked back into the house, the silence oppressive. The party decorations, once so cheerful and celebratory, now felt like a cruel mockery. I sat down at the kitchen table, my head in my hands, and waited for the longest night of my life to end. The days following the party were a blur. Anthony didn't come home that night, or the next. He didn't answer his phone or respond to messages. Panic set in as the reality of what had happened sank in. Our children, Emily and David, asked about their father, and I had no answers for them. Every morning, I woke up early, hoping to see Anthony's car in the driveway. It wasn't there. I checked my phone, no messages, no missed calls. I tried calling him again, but it went straight to voicemail. I left another message, my voice shaking. Anthony, please call me. I want you, honey. I spent the day in a haze, barely able to focus on anything. Emily and David were curious and concerned. Where's Daddy? Emily asked, her big brown eyes filled with worry. He's just taking some time to himself, I replied, forcing a smile. He'll be back soon. But as the hours turned into days, my reassurances felt more and more hollow. Each morning, I would wake up hoping to find him at home, only to be met with the same emptiness. I combed through my phone, calling everyone who might have seen him. His parents, his siblings, his friends, none of them had any information. Each call ended in disappointment. I reached out to Paul, hoping he might have heard from Anthony. When I called, he answered immediately. Nancy, I'm so sorry. I haven't seen him since the party. I feel terrible about what happened. If there's anything I can do, just let me know if you hear anything, I said, cutting him off. I couldn't bear to listen to his apologies. I hung up, feeling more isolated than ever. I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy for the kids. I took them to school, helped with homework, and attended their soccer games. But my mind was always elsewhere, consumed by thoughts of Anthony. I replayed the night of the party over and over in my head, wishing I could undo everything. My guilt was a constant companion, gnawing at me day and night. 2 weeks passed with no word from Anthony. My calls went unanswered, and his voicemail remained full. The house felt empty without him, a constant reminder of my mistakes. I barely slept, my nights filled with worry and regret. Every sound made me jump, hoping it was him coming home. One evening, after putting Emily and David to bed, I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. I searched for missing persons reports, trying to find any trace of Anthony. I scoured social media, hoping for any sign that he was okay. But there was nothing. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I reached out to Anthony's closest friends again, desperate for any information. I called his best friend from college, Paul, who lived in another state. He is the reason for all of this. Paul, have you heard from Anthony at all? He hasn't been home in 2 weeks. No, Nancy. I haven't heard from him. I'm really worried. Have you tried contacting the police? Not yet, I admitted. I keep hoping he'll just come back. But maybe you're right. Maybe it's time to involve them. The next morning, I went to the local police station and filed a missing person report. I handed over a recent photo of Anthony and provided all the details I could think of. The officer was kind but realistic. We'll do what we can, ma'am. Sometimes people just need some time away. But we'll keep an eye out. Leaving the police station, I felt a strange mix of hope and despair. I had done everything I could, but there were no guarantees. All I could do now was wait and hope for the best. The following week, I continued my routine, trying to keep things normal for the kids. I took them to school, cooked dinner, and tried to be there for them as much as possible. Emily and David asked fewer questions, sensing that something was wrong but not fully understanding what. Their innocence was a small comfort amidst the chaos. One afternoon, while picking up Emily from school, I ran into one of Anthony's colleagues. He looked surprised to see me. Nancy, I was just thinking about you. We haven't seen Anthony at work lately. Is everything okay? My heart sank. I had hoped that maybe Anthony was still going to work, trying to maintain some normalcy. He's been away. I'm not really sure where he is right now. Well, if there's anything we can do, let us know. We're all worried about him. Thank you, I said, forcing a smile. I'll let you know. As I drove home, Emily chattered in the back seat, oblivious to the turmoil. Her voice was a soothing distraction from my thoughts. But as soon as we got home, the weight of Anthony's absence returned. That evening, as I sat on the couch, I heard a knock at the door. My heart raced as I hurried to answer it. But it wasn't Anthony. It was a police officer. "Mrs. Anthony?" he asked. "Yes, that's me. We've been looking into your husband's disappearance. We haven't found any leads yet, but we'll keep you updated. In the meantime, if you hear from him, please let us know." "Thank you, officer," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. As I closed the door, I felt a sense of hopelessness. 2 weeks had passed, and there was still no sign of Anthony. I went to bed that night, staring at the empty space beside me, wondering if he would ever come back. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of the front door opening. My heart leaped as I rushed downstairs. But it was just the wind, blowing the door slightly ajar. I closed it, feeling more alone than ever. The days dragged on, each one blending into the next. The house felt emptier with each passing day, and I struggled to hold on to hope. All I could do was wait, praying that Anthony would come back and give us a chance to make things right. One evening, just as the sun was setting, I heard the familiar sound of Anthony's car pulling into the driveway. My heart raced as I ran to the window. There he was, looking determined and composed. Behind him, a moving truck filled with our belongings. Anthony walked up to the house with Emily and David in tow. The kids looked confused but happy to see their father. I rushed to the door, relief flooding through me. "Anthony, where have you been?" "I'm so sorry." He cut me off with a cold, hard stare. "Save it," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. He handed me a stack of papers, divorce papers and DNA tests. "It's all in there. The kids aren't mine, are they?" The kids stood by, their faces reflecting confusion and anxiety. Emily clung to her father's leg while David held back, his eyes wide with a mix of emotions. I glanced at the papers in my hands, my mind racing. The truth was out, and there was no escaping it. Anthony's gaze didn't waver. "Are they?" he repeated, his tone demanding an answer. I swallowed hard, my voice barely a whisper. "No, they're not." Anthony's face hardened further. He looked at the kids, then back at me. "I'm done here," he said flatly. "You can live with Paul. I'm washing my hands of this." He turned to Emily and David, kneeling down to their level. "I'm sorry, kids. I love you both, but I can't stay here anymore. You need to go with your mom." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Daddy, don't go," she pleaded, her small hands clutching his arm. David's face crumpled, and he started to cry. "Why, Dad? Why can't you stay?" Anthony's face softened for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "It's not your fault, kids. It's between your mom and me. I need you to be strong, okay?" He hugged them tightly, his eyes closing as he fought back his own emotions. Then, standing up, he looked at me one last time. "Goodbye, Nancy," he said, his voice steely. I watched helplessly as Anthony walked back to his car, leaving a silence that felt more suffocating than ever. The moving truck driver, having witnessed the tense exchange, began unloading our belongings onto the driveway. Each item seemed to symbolize the dismantling of our life together. As the truck drove away, I was left standing in the doorway, the divorce papers and DNA test results heavy in my hands. I glanced at the kids, who were still in shock. "Let's go inside," I said, my voice trembling. They followed me in, their steps slow and uncertain. Inside, the house felt cold and empty. The once welcoming space now seemed like a hollow shell. I led Emily and David to the living room and sat down with them on the couch. "I know this is hard to understand," I began, choosing my words carefully. "But your dad and I, we have some problems we can't fix." David wiped his tears with his sleeve. "Is it because of what Uncle Paul said at the party?" I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Yes, it is. I made some mistakes, and now your dad needs some time away." Emily sniffled. "Are we going to live with Uncle Paul?" I hesitated, the weight of my actions pressing down on me. "For now, we'll stay here. We'll figure things out together." The days that followed were a whirlwind of adjustments. The kids struggled to understand why their father wasn't coming back. I tried to keep things as normal as possible, but the absence of Anthony's presence was palpable. Every corner of the house reminded me of him, of what we had lost. One afternoon, while sorting through the papers Anthony had given me, I found a note tucked between the pages. It was in Anthony's handwriting, and it read, "I hope you find the happiness you couldn't find with me. Take care of the kids. They deserve better." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Anthony's departure was final. There was no turning back. I had to face the consequences of my actions and find a way to move forward. Paul tried to reach out several times, his messages filled with apologies and offers of help. I ignored him, unable to face the source of my ruin. I needed to focus on Emily and David, to provide them with the stability they desperately needed. Weeks turned into months. Slowly, the kids and I settled into a new routine. It was far from easy, but we managed. Emily found comfort in drawing pictures of our family, often including Anthony, hoping he might come back. David buried himself in his schoolwork, his way of coping with the upheaval. One evening, as I was tucking them into bed, David looked up at me with his big, innocent eyes. "Mom, will Dad ever come back?" I took a deep breath, fighting back my own tears. "I don't know, sweetie, but no matter what happens, we have each other, and we'll be okay." Emily reached out and took my hand. "We miss him, but we love you too, Mom." Their words were a balm to my wounded heart. I kissed them goodnight, knowing that our path ahead would be difficult, but we would face it together. The next morning, I woke up early and sat at the kitchen table, the divorce papers in front of me. It was time to sign them, to accept the finality of Anthony's decision. As I picked up the pen, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was an end, but also a beginning, a chance to rebuild and learn from my mistakes. With a steady hand, I signed the papers and put them in an envelope, ready to be sent off. The weight of the past few months lifted slightly, replaced by a determination to move forward. As the sun rose, casting a warm glow over the house, I felt a glimmer of hope. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. And with Emily and David by my side, I knew we would find our way. Anthony came back that day. He led the kids back to the car, and I followed, pleading with him to reconsider. He opened the car door and gestured for the kids to get in. Emily and David hesitated, glancing back at me with confusion and sadness. "Anthony, please don't do this," I begged. "Think about Emily and David. They need you." He paused, looking at our children, then back at me. "They'll be better off without this mess," he said quietly. "I've set everything up for them. They'll be fine." Emily clung to his leg, her eyes wide and tearful. "Daddy, don't leave us." Anthony knelt down to her level. "Emily, I'm not leaving you. I'll always be here for you, but I can't stay in this house anymore. It's too painful." David stood a few steps back, his arms crossed. "Where are we going, Dad?" Anthony glanced at me, then back at David. "For now, you'll stay with your mom. I'll see you on weekends and holidays. I promise." He hugged them both tightly, his face set with determination. I stood there, feeling helpless as he closed the car door and walked around to the driver's side. The engine roared to life, and he drove off, leaving me standing in the driveway, devastated and alone. As the car disappeared down the street, I felt a hollowness settle in my chest. The reality of the situation hit me hard. Anthony was gone, and our family was shattered. I turned back to the house, the silence inside a stark contrast to the chaos of the last few hours. Paul arrived shortly after, pulling up in his own car. He got out, his face etched with concern. "Nancy, what happened?" "I got your message." I shook my head, unable to find the words. I led him inside, where the remnants of our life together were scattered around the living room. The divorce papers and DNA tests lay on the coffee table, a painful reminder of the truth. Paul picked up the papers, his eyes widening as he read. "Nancy, I didn't know. I'm so sorry." I sank into the couch, exhausted. "It's too late, Paul. The damage is done. Anthony's gone, and there's no fixing this." He sat down next to me, his expression somber. "What can I do to help?" I looked around the room, trying to think. "We need to figure out what's next. The kids are confused and scared. I don't know how to explain all this to them. Paul nodded. I can help with that. We'll take it one step at a time. The next few days were a whirlwind of adjustments. I had to find a new normal for Emily and David while dealing with the legal fallout of the divorce. Anthony had left clear instructions and had already set up a new living arrangement for himself. He stayed true to his word, arranging regular visits with the kids. One evening, as I was putting Emily to bed, she looked up at me with wide eyes. "Mom, why did Daddy leave?" I hesitated, trying to find the right words. "Your dad and I have some problems that we couldn't fix, but he still loves you very much, and he'll always be there for you." She nodded, seeming to accept the answer. "Will we ever be a family again?" I forced a smile. "We'll always be a family, Emily. It's just going to be a little different now." After tucking her in, I went downstairs to find Paul organizing some of the boxes we had brought back from Anthony's house. "We need to make this place feel like home again," he said, glancing up at me. "For the kids." I nodded, appreciating his efforts. "Thanks, Paul. I know this isn't easy." He shrugged. "It's the least I can do. I messed up, Nancy. I'm here to make things right." The days turned into weeks, and we slowly settled into a new routine. Emily and David adjusted to the changes, though they missed their father terribly. I tried to be strong for them, putting on a brave face even when I felt like breaking down. Paul was a constant presence, helping with the kids and around the house. He tried to make up for his mistakes, but the tension between us was palpable. We both knew that things would never be the same. One Saturday morning, Anthony arrived to pick up Emily and David for the weekend. He stood on the porch, his expression unreadable. "How are they doing?" he asked, glancing past me into the house. "They're adjusting," I replied. "They miss you." He nodded, his gaze distant. "I miss them too. This isn't easy for any of us." Emily and David came running down the stairs, their faces lighting up when they saw him. "Daddy!" they cried in unison, rushing into his arms. He hugged them tightly, his eyes closing for a moment. "Hey, you two. Ready for a fun weekend?" They nodded eagerly, their excitement a stark contrast to the sadness that lingered in the air. Anthony looked at me over their heads, his expression softening. "Take care, Nancy." "You too, Anthony," I replied, watching as they walked to his car. The engine started, and they drove off, leaving me standing on the porch, watching them go. Paul stepped up beside me, his hands in his pockets. "You okay?" I shrugged. "I will be. We have to keep moving forward." He nodded, understanding. "We'll get through this. Together." As I turned to go back inside, I knew that our journey was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, more difficult conversations and adjustments. But for the sake of Emily and David, we would find a way to navigate this new reality. And perhaps, in time, we could all find a sense of peace and stability once more. The weeks that followed were a struggle. Moving in with Paul was far from easy. The guilt and tension hung heavy in the air. I missed Anthony more than I could express, but there was no turning back. Paul's house was smaller and less familiar than our old home. It took time to adjust to the new space. The kids missed their father, and their questions were relentless. I had to rebuild my life, piece by piece, and face the consequences of my actions. Emily and David were resilient, but I knew they missed their father deeply. I could only hope that one day we might find some semblance of peace. Our days settled into a routine. Mornings were chaotic with getting the kids ready for school. Emily and David were resilient, adapting quickly to their new surroundings. Emily, the younger of the two, often asked about Anthony. Her innocent questions stung, but I answered as best as I could. "We're going to Daddy's this weekend, right?" Emily asked one morning as I packed their lunches. "Yes, sweetie. Daddy will pick you up on Friday," I replied, trying to keep my tone cheerful. David, on the other hand, kept his feelings to himself. He was more withdrawn, spending a lot of time in his room. I worried about him but gave him space, hoping he would open up when he was ready. Paul did his best to help. He took on the role of a stepfather with surprising ease, helping with homework and playing catch in the yard. He was trying to make amends, and I appreciated his efforts. But the unspoken tension between us was always there, a reminder of the past we couldn't escape. One evening, as I looked out the window of my new home, I vowed to be a better person, for my children and for myself. It was the only way forward. I started making changes, small at first. I reached out to Anthony's parents, keeping them involved in Emily and David's lives. They were hesitant at first, but gradually, we found a way to communicate. "Thank you for letting us see the kids," Anthony's mother said during one of their visits. "It's important for them to know their grandparents." "Of course," I replied. "They need all the family they can get right now." I also decided to go back to work. I had been a stay-at-home mom for years, but now I needed a sense of purpose. I found a part-time job at a local bookstore, a quiet place where I could lose myself in the stacks of books and escape my thoughts for a few hours each day. "Mom, can we visit you at work?" Emily asked one afternoon. "Sure, honey. Maybe this weekend," I said, smiling at her enthusiasm. Emily and David visited the bookstore often, and it became a place where we could spend time together outside of the house. They loved exploring the children's section, and I enjoyed watching them lose themselves in stories. It was a small step towards building a new life. Despite our efforts, there were still difficult moments. One night, after putting the kids to bed, I found David sitting on the floor of his room, looking at a photo album. "Hey, buddy, what are you doing?" I asked, sitting down next to him. "Just looking at old pictures," he replied quietly. I glanced at the open page. It was a photo from one of our family vacations, all of us smiling and happy. "We had some good times, didn't we?" "Yeah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We'll make new memories, David. It might be different, but it can still be good," I said, hoping he believed me. As the weeks turned into months, our new life began to take shape. The kids adjusted to their new school, made friends, and started to smile more. Paul and I found a way to coexist, focusing on the kids and avoiding conversations about the past. Anthony stayed true to his word, seeing Emily and David regularly. The kids looked forward to their weekends with him, and it gave me a chance to have some time to myself. I used those weekends to catch up on work, run errands, and sometimes just sit quietly and think. One Saturday, I found a letter addressed to me in Anthony's handwriting. My heart raced as I opened it, unsure of what to expect. "Nancy, I hope you are finding your way. I wanted to let you know that I am too. This is hard for all of us, but I believe we can get through it. For Emily and David's sake, we need to keep moving forward. Take care of them. Anthony." I read the letter several times, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. It was a reminder that Anthony was still a part of our lives, even if things would never be the same. As the seasons changed, so did we. Our new beginning was far from perfect, but it was a start. The kids continued to grow and thrive, finding joy in their new surroundings. Paul and I found a tentative peace, focusing on the future rather than the past. One evening, as I stood in the kitchen making dinner, Emily and David ran in, laughing and chasing each other. Paul followed, shaking his head and smiling at their antics. "What's for dinner, Mom?" David asked, peeking over the counter. "Spaghetti and meatballs," I replied, ruffling his hair. "Your favorite." Emily clapped her hands in excitement. "Yay, I love spaghetti." As we sat down to eat, I looked around the table at the people who mattered most to me. We had been through so much, but we were still here, still together in our own way. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was our life, and we were making it work. And in that moment, I knew that we would be okay.